Hi everybody, it's Mrs. Peachy for Summer School Biology. Today we are going to be looking at a lesson on photosynthesis. Briefly, photosynthesis was discovered in the latter part of the 1700s. It was in a couple of different experiments where they were putting mint leaves under jars after candles had been lit, and looking at the air quality. Long story short, Jan Engelhaus repeated the experiment after Joseph Priestley did, and he discovered that it's necessary for light to be involved in order for that mint leaf to survive in the jar after the candle had already burned out all the good air, from what they called it. Okay, so photosynthesis, you guys all know, is done by plants and other organisms, some protists, some bacteria that have chlorophyll. And we're going to talk about photoautotrophs, which are ones that rely on the sun to be able to produce their own food. There are such organisms as chemoautotrophs, which live in the bottom of the ocean near hydrothermal vents. They rely on the chemicals from those vents to make their own food. So they're kind of a cool, unique ecosystem that was only recently discovered. However, that's not something we'll focus on today. Okay, so now it comes down to the nitty-gritty. The cells in plants and protists contain specialized organelles called chloroplasts. And we'll talk about the photosynthesis that takes place in those organisms. Inside the chloroplasts, there are these little structures, look like little discs, and they are stacked on top of each other. They are called thylakoids, and a group of thylakoids is referred to as a granum. And then there's a bunch of space around the thylakoids, which is called the stroma. And so we'll be looking at both of those terms, the thylakoid and the stroma, as we go through the process of photosynthesis. The thylakoid, this little hollow disc, actually has a membrane around it, much like the cell membrane. It's what we call a phospholipid bilayer. So it's got two layers of lipids. Remember, they've got their hydrophobic and hydrophilic ends, and the hydrophilic ends are all turned toward the inside of the layer, and, the hydrophobic ends are on the inside of the layer, and the hydrophilic ends are hanging out. So it's very much like the cell membrane in that way. So we're going to talk a bunch about how stuff is moving across the membrane and how different things can, you can have a gradient across the membrane, more of it on one side than the other, so that you have differences in concentration, just like we did when we looked at osmosis and diffusion. Okay, so you will need to know the overall reaction of photosynthesis, and essentially that's just taking carbon dioxide and water, plus the energy from the sun, to make sugar, oxygen, and also some more water comes back out of that whole process. We'll talk about what happens to half the water and how you take the rest of those ingredients to make sugar. So photosynthesis is divided into two main parts, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. The light-dependent reactions, they obviously require light in order for them to work. That's where, that sun's energy comes from. The light-independent reactions, they can take place in both the light or the dark. It doesn't really matter. Another name for light-independent reactions is the Kelvin cycle. So this is where it gets a bit complicated, so bear with me. The whole purpose of photosynthesis is to take that energy from the sun and to shuttle it through to be able to use that energy to make sugar, because sugar is a good way to store energy long term. And then it's stored in the bonds, of the sugar molecules. And then if the plant needs food later, it can take that sugar and it can break it down and extract the energy from the sugar and use that to make ATP, which is a short-term energy carrying molecule. And then from there it can carry the energy to wherever it would need the energy within the cell. So how does it do this? Remember, ATP is a special molecule that carries energy. That's kind of what it does. And another energy carrier is NADPH. And we have a few other ones in there. NADP+, NAD+, NADP, FAD, FADH2. That's too much. So we're going to focus on the ATP, the NADPH as our two main energy carriers. Okay? So let's look at the light-dependent reactions. This is a summary of it in words, but let's look at the picture first. Remember that we're taking light from the sun, and that's kind of what's starting this whole reaction. So each one of these little green guys here is represented one chlorophyll molecule. We refer to the first chlorophyll molecule that the sunlight hits as photosystem 2, and then the second chlorophyll molecule as photosystem 1. I know that's all screwy and backwards, but that's just the way it is. So you have to envision, let me get an arrow here, that light is coming in, right? And it's striking photosystem 2. This is chlorophyll. It's striking the chlorophyll. Now light is energy, so a photon of light hits photosystem 2, and photosystem 2 is just a molecule. It's made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. What happens is some of the electrons that are in photosystem 2 are excited, and they're just like boosted right out of photosystem 2. And that's okay, because ready and waiting is what we call an electron carrier molecule. This is a mobile electron carrier. And it's just sitting there waiting to take an electron. So the electron is going to go from photosystem 2 to this electron carrier molecule, this mobile electron carrier. And that is going to move over to this called the cytochrome complex. So remember, this electron is representative of energy. That's what it is. It's energy. So this electron goes to the cytochrome complex, but after that happens, the photosystem 2 kind of freaks out a little bit because it's now missing an electron. So what it does is it takes another electron from a water molecule. So we have a water molecule right here, and we'll color this guy, color him blue so we can remember he's water. We split this water molecule apart, or photosystem 2 splits it apart and takes some electrons, but now what this is made up of is hydrogen ions and oxygen. So the hydrogen ions stay inside the interior of the thylakoid, but the oxygen gets ejected. So here we go. Bye-bye, oxygen. This is going out to space. It is how we breathe. So this is how the photosynthesis process produces oxygen for us to breathe. It's just a waste product in that first part. Okay? All right. Oopsies. This guy a little bit bigger. All right. So now we have this electron that's gone over to the cytochrome complex. And the cytochrome complex is going to take a little bit of this energy from the electron. And it's going to use that energy if I can get this down so you can see it a little bit better. It's going to use that energy to pump hydrogen ions through the thylakoid membrane into the interior of the thylakoid. So you're getting hydrogen ions from the water. I should probably draw those in here too. So some of these hydrogen ions come from the water, and some are being pumped across the thylakoid membrane through the cytochrome complex. So the interior of the thylakoid is filling up with hydrogens, and this is creating a lovely gradient. You have a lot of positively charged hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid, and outside the thylakoid not. So what's happening is that the hydrogens will want to move from an area of high concentration inside the thylakoid to low concentration outside the thylakoid. Not to mention the fact that they're all positively charged, so they're going to be repelled from one another. So that's a good thing, because what happens is those hydrogen ions will move through this enzyme here, ATP synthase, and when they move through that, they provide energy for another molecule, ADP, to pick up an extra phosphate and become ATP. Remember, ATP is our lovely energy carrier molecule that we want to have. So that's one thing that happens, is you get some ATP out of this process. So following this electron then, carried over to the cytochrome, right? And then what happens is we have another energy carrier molecule that's ready to take the electron. Well, try that one more time. There we go. It's ready to take the molecule, and the old energy carrier molecule is going to go back to photosystem 2 and start the process over again. This new energy carrier molecule is going to bring the electron, which has a little bit lower energy now, to the next chloroplast, or chlorophyll, excuse me, which is photosystem 1. Now the electron actually just moves right through photosystem 1, and the energy from that electron is used to make NADPH, which is our next energy carrier molecule. So the end product of photosystem 1 is the production of ATP and NADPH. That's energy carrier. So then those energy carrying molecules, are used in the light independent reaction, which we call the Kelvin cycle. So we need energy to make the Kelvin cycle go. Kelvin cycle brings in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and quite a few complicated things go on, and what happens is it yields sugar. Okay? We are not going to get into the details of the Kelvin cycle. It's pretty complicated, much more so than the light reactions. So it's enough, I think, for you guys to know those light reactions pretty well. But remember, the ATP and the NADPH is used by the Kelvin cycle to make the sugar, and then also with carbon dioxide from the environment. And then the ADP and the NADP plus goes back to the light reactions in order to be able to make more of the ATP and the NADPH. So that part continues too as part of this whole cycle. Okay guys, so that is the gist of the entire photosynthesis process. I know it's a bit complicated, but I did simplify it quite a bit. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. And next time we will talk about respiration. Have a good day.